And so the goal now isn't necessarily to go backward and rediscover some younger version of yourself. The goal is to become conscious of who you've already become. Most women don't disappear overnight. They disappeared in layers. Some of those things that you call your personality are actually survival strategies. Maybe the goal isn't actually finding your old self again. Maybe the goal is finally noticing the woman standing here right in front of you today. Well, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but midlife usually doesn't change women loudly. It changes them quietly, one responsibility at a time, one heartbreak, one season of survival, one adjustment, one disappointment, one sacrifice. And then one day you look up and you realize somewhere along the way you became someone. So today's conversation is one that I've been sitting with for a while because I think it touches something that a lot of women feel but haven't quite been able to figure out the words for. And here's where I want to start. I think a lot of women hit midlife and assume they've lost themselves. Like somewhere between the kids and the career and the caregiving and the constant motion, she just disappeared. But honestly, I don't know that that's fully true anymore. I think life shaped them while they were busy living it. Motherhood shaped them. Perhaps marriage shaped them. Burnout even shaped them. Grief shaped them. Pressure shaped them. Responsibility shaped them. And so the goal now isn't necessarily to go backward and rediscover some younger version of yourself. The goal is to become conscious of who you've already become. Because here's what I see all the time with the women that I work with. They're not lost. They're operating on autopilot. They're running the show from old expectations and old identities and old coping mechanisms that don't fit who or where they are anymore. And this quiet evolution of midlife women is what we're talking about today in this conversation. We're going to cover what it is, why it happens, and most importantly, what to do with it. And so, let's get into it. Well, if you've been following along and thinking, I need to go deeper, I need more, I want to invite you to something totally free that I've created. It's called Midlife Clutter Explained and Solved. This is my free Substack where every Tuesday I write a deeper unpacking of the real clutter that women are carrying. Not just the piles on the counter, but the mental load, the emotional backlog, the decision fatigue, the overthinking spirals. We break it down, we name it, we untangle it, and then on Fridays, I share a lighter post to help you reset your perspective before the weekend. Something that's grounding and clarifying and, of course, honest. If you've ever felt like your life looks fine on the outside but feels overloaded underneath, this is for you, and it's completely free. You can read it in 5 minutes or less, or you can sit with it longer if you choose. Just go to midlifeclutterhelp.com and subscribe to Midlife Clutter Explained and Solved. Because clutter isn't just about stuff, it's about capacity. And we're going to talk about it there. Okay, so here's something that I really want you to hear. Most women don't disappear overnight. They disappeared in layers. It wasn't one dramatic moment. There was no single day where you woke up and didn't recognize yourself. It happened slowly over years, the way that water shapes rocks, gradually, consistently, and without a lot of pomp and circumstance or fanfare. You became a mom, and that was the most beautiful thing. But it also quietly became the lens through which you saw everything about yourself. As a mom, you became the caretaker, the one who managed the home, the one who remembered the dentist appointments and the permission slips and the teacher's name and the what your kid eats and the what they don't eat and the friend solution and situation that is struggling, making them struggle right now. You became the strong one, which sounds like a compliment, until you realize that it really was just permission for everyone else to stop worrying about you. You became the helper, the problem solver, the person that other people called when things got hard. And none of that is bad. Not one bit of it. I want to be really clear about that. Those roles, they matter. They're meaningful. They reflect love and commitment and incredible capacity. But here's what happens when roles like those run unchecked. They slowly become identity. You stop being a woman who happens to be a mom, and you start being mom. And that's it. That's your everything. And in the process, you stop being a woman who is great at holding things together, and you start being the person who is only valuable when she's holding things together. Okay, let me make sure that you heard that. You stop being a woman who is simply great at holding things together, and you start being the person who is only valuable when or because she's holding things together. That's an important shift, right? You you from one piece of your personality, you move from that just being one piece of your personality to it being your whole identity. And that whole identity is built around being the one who carries it all, whether you realized it or not. And underneath all of that, the real you, it starts to get quieter. It's not gone, it's just quieter. This you are operating in the background while all of those roles and responsibilities and commitments and expectations and people who need you, those. And what makes this so tricky is that no one is even noticing it is happening. And also, nobody pulls you aside and said, "Hey, I just want to check in. How are you doing?" Not, "How are the kids?" or, "Hey, what is your husband or what is your family up to?" or, "How's work going for your husband?" But, "How are you?" And again, no one asks this because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're functioning, you're showing up, you're getting it done. And in our culture, a woman who's getting it done is celebrated. She isn't questioned. No one worries about her. And so the shift, it goes unnoticed by everyone around you and then eventually by you. I've talked to so many women who described this as kind of a fog, right? There's this fog and they can't point to one thing that went wrong. Life is fine on paper. They have people who love them and a home and maybe a career. Maybe they've got faith. Maybe they've got all the things that they thought they wanted. And yet there's this kind of a low grade hum that something is missing. Something is not quite right and they can't name it. And so they just assume that they're missing something. They just assume that they're wrong. They assume that something is wrong with them. But in reality, nothing is wrong with them. They've just been living so fully for everyone else that they've completely lost track of themselves in the process. And I want to share something from my own story because I think it captures this better than anything I could explain in theory. There was a season in my life where I was in total bone deep burnout, essentially. And the thing is, I knew better. I teach this stuff. I coach women on this exact thing. Protect yourself, set boundaries, don't overfunction. I say it all day long. And then I looked up and I realized that I was doing none of the things that I help women do. I was doing none of them for myself. I was exhausted. And I will say in full transparency, I was resentful. I was certainly running on fumes, but yet I kept going because asking for help felt harder than just continuing to overfunction because the rejection and even the idea of the potential rejection, it stung more than the exhaustion did. And so I just kept doing it all. I kept moving, I kept managing, I kept holding it all together. And then there was the shame, right? There was the shame of knowing that I'd betrayed my own values, which only made it worse. Because here's the thing about being a coach who teaches this stuff. You would think that that would make me immune to falling into these traps. You'd think that the awareness would protect you. But knowledge and application are two completely different things. In my head, I for sure knew the principles. I just wasn't living them. And that gap between what I knew and what I was actually doing, well, this created its own kind of frustration. And it really took that season fully breaking me open to make me realize that I wasn't just burned out from doing too much. I was burned out from doing things that should have been shared, things my family should have stepped up for, while convincing myself it was easier just to do it all myself than to face the discomfort of asking. And when I finally stopped and looked at all that was going on, honestly, I realized that I wasn't just in a bad season. I was in this pattern. It was a very old and very practiced pattern of overfunctioning to avoid the vulnerability of needing something from someone else. That felt too painfully vulnerable to me. That's not a personality trait. That was a survival strategy that I had developed. And it had been running my life for years, long before I ever even started helping women with this very same thing. But here's what that season taught me: survival patterns quietly become personality traits if we are not very, very careful. And when you operate in crisis mode long enough, it starts to just feel like who you are. You stop noticing that you're overfunctioning because overfunctioning has become your baseline. You stop noticing that you never rest because never resting is just how you live now. You stop noticing that you are running entirely from responsibility instead of actually living your life with any kind of intention. That's the quiet shift. That's how it happens. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually just kind of sit with this for a minute. Don't just let this pass you by. Don't just let this be something that you hear and that you move on from. So, when was the last time you actually asked yourself what you want? Not what your kids need, not what your husband needs, not what the house needs or the job needs or the next season of life requires from you. What do you want? What about this one? What parts of your life feel like obligation instead of alignment? When's the last time you even thought about the fact that there's a difference between obligation and alignment? Here's another one. Are you living intentionally, or are you just maintaining what's already in motion? Are you just going through the motions? Now, I realize that all of these are heavy questions. And if your gut just tightened a little bit when I asked them, that's not a bad sign. That tightening is information. Pay attention to it. Because here's where a lot of women get stuck. They assume the answer is to go back to who they used to be. They recognize, I don't even know who I am anymore. I need to get back to who I used to be, to the old version of themselves, to rediscover themselves even. And I want to push back on that because there's this message out there, a common one where I feel like in the wellness and personal development space, and it's this message that says that midlife is about finding yourself again. It's going back to who you were before the kids, before the hustle, before the chaos. And there's something that is very emotionally appealing about that, right? The idea that she's still in there, the real you, the younger, lighter, freer version. But I honestly want to challenge that narrative today because I think it's actually keeping a lot of women stuck. Because here's the truth. Your younger self wasn't necessarily wiser. She was just younger. She was learning. She was still figuring it out. And a lot of the things that you did in your 20s and your 30s, a lot of how you operated, it wasn't coming from clarity. It was coming from conditioning. You people pleased because you hadn't yet learned how to say no without worrying about what everybody else would think. You overextended because you hadn't yet learned how to say no without a justification speech. You pushed and you hustled and you proved yourself because somewhere along the way you absorbed the message that you had to earn your right to rest or to just to be. And you tolerated dysfunction. You abandoned your own needs and you moved through the world with very little understanding of who you actually believed or what you actually believed, what you actually valued, or what you valued outside of everyone else's thoughts and values, and what everybody else told you that you should believe and value. And so this is where the idea of going back to that, like, I'm not sure that's the goal. Now, don't hear me wrong. There are absolutely parts of your younger self that are worth reconnecting with. It's not all bad, right? Maybe she was more playful. Maybe she was less serious. Maybe she took more risks. Maybe she cared less about what people thought. Maybe she was more creative or more spontaneous, more in touch with what made her come alive. And those things, yes, absolutely, those things could very well be worth reclaiming. But there are also parts of that younger version of you that deserve to just be released. Could be things like the perfectionism or the need for external validation, the tolerance for being treated less than you deserved, the belief that hustling harder was the answer to everything. The proving, the shrinking, the saying yes when every part of you was screaming no. You've outgrown those things. And that is not a loss, that is growth. I remember a conversation that I had with one of my clients who had said, I just want to feel like myself again, like the person I was before all of this. And I gently asked her, which part of her though? Because some of what you're describing, some of the ease and the freedom that she had, that came from not yet having the responsibilities that you now carry. But some of what she had, you've actually grown into something richer. And that really made her think for a minute. She got quiet and she said, you know what? I never thought about it that way. And so, in that similar line of thinking, here's a reframe that I want to offer to you today. This season, especially this midlife season of life, it isn't asking you to become younger. I believe it's asking you to become more honest about who you've become, more honest about what no longer fits, more honest about what you've been carrying that was never yours to carry in the first place, or that you can say, you know what, I'm just done carrying that now. And then there's wisdom and discernment and emotional maturity and clarity and capacity awareness and self-respect. You have those things now, but I know that you didn't always have those things. And no younger version of you could give you what this season has given you. Even the hard, even in the tired, even in the moments where you felt most lost. And so if the goal then isn't reinvention and it's not going backward, so what is the actual work that we should be doing here in midlife? Well, this is the heart of really everything that I want to say today. The work, it's not about going backward. It's about becoming conscious or aware of who you have become. Because here's what happens in all of the busyness. Here's what happens in all of the hard things. Even here's what happens in survival mode. And a lot of us have been living in survival mode for years without even labeling it that way. In the midst of all of that, you stop noticing yourself. You stop asking how you're doing because there isn't time or space or energy to process the answer anyway. So why ask the question? You get good at managing everything around you and gradually stop managing yourself at all. You get efficient, you get functional, and you lose the thread of who you actually are underneath all of that function. And here's something really important. If you're half listening, give me your full attention for this line right here. Actually, there's two I really want to make sure that you hear. Number one, exhaustion becomes identity. Number two, overfunctioning becomes normal. Do those hit home for you at all? I hope that you are waving your hand in the air right now. I hope that you are feeling seen because I don't know. I really think I can say I don't know of women in this season of life who haven't bought into the fact that exhaustion becomes an identity, becomes your identity, and that overfunctioning becomes normal. The coping mechanisms that you picked up years ago when things were hard, they don't feel like coping mechanisms anymore. They just feel like you. And this is where I want to say something that I think is really important, and I want you to hear it all the way completely. Some of those things that you call your personality are actually survival strategies. Here are some of the common ones. Hyper independence. You learned it because relying on others felt unsafe or disappointing, or like too much to ask. Hyper independence. The second one, emotional numbing. You learned to do this because feeling everything was simply too much to carry. It was too heavy. Control. You learned this because somewhere along the way, control was the only thing that stood between you and total chaos. And let me just say this. As a mom of 9, this one hit me hard because chaos can happen in our home very quickly, very easily. I have to be very careful with control. Here's something else that you could have learned. And again, you call them parts of your personality, but they're actually survival strategies. Constant productivity. You learned this because The value that you felt about yourself, it got tied to your output at some point. And so slowing down then felt dangerous. Here's another one, overcommitting. You learned this because saying yes kept everyone happy and it kept the peace. And keeping the peace, in a way, in a big way, was survival. Well, if you've been following along and thinking, I need to go deeper, I need more, I want to invite you to something totally free that I've created. It's called Midlife Clutter Explained and Solved. This is my free Substack where every Tuesday I write a deeper unpacking of the real clutter that women are carrying. Not just the piles on the counter, but the mental load, the emotional backlog, the decision fatigue, the overthinking spirals. We break it down, we name it, we untangle it, and then on Fridays, I share a lighter post to help you reset your perspective before the weekend. Something that's grounding and clarifying and, of course, honest. If you've ever felt like your life looks fine on the outside but feels overloaded underneath, this is for you, and it's completely free. You can read it in 5 minutes or less, or you can sit with it longer if you choose. Just go to midlifeclutterhelp.com and subscribe to Midlife Clutter Explained and Solved. Because clutter isn't just about stuff, it's about capacity. And we're going to talk about it there. Here's another one, caretaking everyone else first. And you learned this because that is what was modeled for you. You learned that this is what was expected of you, what earned you love and belonging. And here's what's wild about all of these strategies. They work. That's why we keep them. They got us through the hard things. They helped us function when functioning felt impossible. They kept us going when going was the only option. And so I'm not asking you to shame yourself for the ways that you learned to cope. Not even a little bit. There is nothing wrong with these. You did nothing wrong. But what I am asking you to consider is this. Are those strategies still serving you? Or are they now the very thing that is keeping you stuck? Because there's a cost to running on survival mode past its expiration date. The control that kept you sane during the chaos now makes you rigid and exhausted. The hyper independence that got you through that hard season, it is now keeping you isolated and a little bit resentful, if you're being honest. The productivity that helped you survive now prevents you from ever actually resting. The people-pleasing that earned you belonging, it now leaves you feeling like you don't even know what you actually want because you're so tuned into what everyone else wants. None of these patterns are failures, but none of them deserve to be permanent either. So let me ask you a few questions, and I want you to really go there with me. Question number 1, what has this season of life taught you? Not just what it took from you, what has it given you? What have you learned about yourself, about what you're capable of, about what you value? The second question, what no longer fits your life? What routines, what expectations, relationships, or commitments belong to an older version of you? One who was operating from a completely different set of circumstances and beliefs. Third question, what drains you now that didn't used to? Because your capacity changes, your tolerance changes, and sometimes what you used to be able to do without blinking an eye, it now costs you something real. This does not indicate weakness. It's self-awareness. Here's another question. What are you tolerating that your current self is deeply tired of tolerating? And the final question, what survival patterns became just who you are when in reality they were just how you coped? Of course, you became different. You lived through things. You navigated seasons that would have broken a lot of people. You showed up when you were running on empty. You held things together when everything in you wanted to fall apart. You loved people through their hardest moments while quietly carrying your hard moments and stuffing them down. And so now if you're standing here wondering, who am I and how did I get here and what do I want? And you don't know, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It means that you have been shaped by all of these things. And now, maybe for the first time, there's enough space to actually look at the shape of you. Again, not with shame, not with regret, just with curiosity and honesty. Who have you become? What parts of that woman are worth celebrating? What parts are ready to be released? But here's the thing, though, and I want to say this clearly. Awareness without action changes nothing. Knowing you've changed doesn't move you forward. Understanding your survival patterns isn't going to dissolve them. Recognizing what no longer fits doesn't automatically make room for something better. And at some point, you have to actually do something with what you know. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to move forward with intention based on what we now know because of our conversation here today. Now, know that I'm not going to give you a 10-step plan. That's not what this needs. What I want to give you are 4 practical, honest action steps that can actually move the needle forward without requiring you to burn your whole life down and start from scratch. Because you don't need to blow everything up. You need to start paying attention and then making intentional decisions, just one at a time. So here is action step 1. It is audit the roles. Actually sit down with a piece of paper and ask yourself, what roles have I confused with my identity? Write them down. Mom, wife, caretaker, helper, the strong one, employee, volunteer, fixer. And then underneath each one, ask, who am I underneath this role? What do I actually think? What do I actually believe? What do I actually want? And what do I actually value? Aside from what this role requires of me. Now, let me be clear about this. This isn't about rejecting your roles. You can love being a mom with everything you have and still be someone outside of that. You can be devoted to your marriage or another relationship and still have an identity that belongs to only you. These things are not in conflict. But you have to know the difference between the role and the woman. Because if you don't like the day those roles shift, when the kids leave and when the job changes, when a relationship ends, you will feel completely lost, not because you lost something external, but because you never knew who you were without that. So don't wait for that moment to actually start asking the question. Ask it now while you still have time to build the answer. So action step 1 was to audit the roles. Action step 2 is to identify what no longer fits. Now, know that this one takes courage because sometimes what no longer fits is something we've invested in for a long time. A relationship, a commitment, a coping mechanism, an expectation. Maybe one that you set for yourself, maybe one that someone else set for you a long time ago and you just went along with it. You never questioned it. Look at your routines, your habits, your commitments, your relationships, your inner dialogue, and ask honestly, does this belong to who I am now or to who I was trying to survive then? Not everything that helped you survive up to this point deserves to come with you into this season or the next one. And know that these little pieces that you decide to leave behind, it doesn't mean that you're not grateful for those things or that you are devaluing them or that you are saying they never served a purpose. Know that you are just using wisdom to decide, what do I want to keep carrying with me now and into the future? And again, this doesn't need to be a big dramatic thing. I'm not telling you to blow up your life and change all of your roles and responsibilities. Sometimes you'll discover that what no longer fits is small, right? It's a habit that you've had for years that quietly drains you, but you just kept doing it. It's an expectation that you're holding yourself to that you never actually examined, at least not in a long time. It's a commitment that you said yes to out of obligation, not alignment. Start there. Start with the small stuff because the small stuff is often where the biggest relief lives. And so action step 2 was to identify what no longer fits. And that sets us up for action step 3, which is choose one intentional shift, not 20, Not a complete overhaul, just one. One thing that represents moving in the direction of who you actually are right now, instead of who you used to be or who everyone else needs you to be. Maybe it's saying no to something that you would have automatically said yes to before. Maybe it's resting, actually resting, without filling the space with something else that's productive. Maybe it's asking for help, even though it's uncomfortable. Maybe it's reconnecting with something that used to matter to you, something creative, something playful, something that's been sitting on the shelf of someday. Maybe it's letting go of an expectation that was never realistic to begin with. One shift, that's all that I'm asking. And know that progress is progress. And here's what I know about intentional decisions: they compound. One honest choice leads to another. One boundary leads to another. One moment of actually listening to yourself instead of overriding yourself, it starts to build a new kind of trust. Trust in your own instincts, trust in your own diagnosis of yourself, trust in your own voice, in your own ability to lead your life instead of just always managing it. You don't need a perfect plan, you just need a first step. So, action step 3 was to choose one intentional shift. Let me share for you what this has looked like in my life this year. One of the things that used to be such an impactful part of my life and really the life of my family, but specifically, it was important to me as well, not just my family, is intentional relationships. It was pursuing intentional relationships. Now, it's real easy, at least for us as a busy family of 11 and now 10, there is always someplace to be. There is always something to do. There is always something to be finished. There is always something to prioritize. That is something that would show up on a to-do list or maybe on a list of goals. And it's really easy for all of those things to drown out the things that actually, again, matter to you or the things that you value. Remember when we talked about that early on in this conversation? And what I realized is that if I kept waiting for there not to be anything else to do, or for the to-do list to actually be done, or for it to feel easy to do the things that actually provide value and meaning to my life, if I wait for it to be easy to experience those things, it's never going to happen. I realized that when I started to ask these questions for myself and when I started to figure out what I actually value and what do I want to be part of my life now and in the future, I came back to the fact that relationships, the depth of relationships. And so this year has been a year for me to very much step into, set aside, make the time for intentional relationships. There are plenty of times where I can feel guilty about putting time into an intentional relationship because there are so many things that didn't get done. There are so many things still waiting for me. But I know, because I've discovered when I asked the hard questions like these and I got honest with myself, I know that that was a piece that has been missing, that intentional depth of relationships piece that has been missing for years. And that was something I wanted to be done with. I wanted to take that with me. I wanted that in my life now and in the future. And so I had to make that happen, just like you. But that's what that one intentional shift has looked like for me this year. Now, that's not the only shift that I've made this year. I'm also taking my health more seriously. I'm also doing the really hard things. I'm asking myself the hard questions and I'm forcing myself to do the hard things that maybe I've known that I really should do, but I've been avoiding doing. I've done a lot of those things. But this intentional relationships, again, when I asked myself a lot of the questions that I asked you to think about, and when I thought about what I value and what's important to me, it was those intentional relationships. And so that is the biggest, and I will say most meaningful intentional shift that I have made this year. But that is what that has looked like in my life. So what is one intentional shift that you're going to make? That's action step 3. And then there's action step 4. It's to start paying attention to yourself again. And this might be the most important one, but it's also the simplest, which is probably why it gets overlooked. Start noticing yourself. What energizes you? What drains you? What feels aligned with who you actually are and what feels like you're just going through the motions, almost like you're just performing? What about this? When do you feel like yourself? And when do you feel most disconnected? What are you doing when time disappears because you're just so engaged in it? And what are you doing when every minute feels like an obligation you're just trying to white knuckle your way through? I'm asking you to I'm not asking you. Let me be clear. I'm not asking you before I get into what I am asking you. Let me talk about what I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you to journal for an hour every morning or build out this whole complicated self-reflection practice overnight, right? I'm just asking you to start noticing. Because the noticing about yourself, that's probably gone quiet. That's probably been quiet for a long time. But it's just to start noticing, to treat yourself like someone worth paying attention to, because you are. Here's a simple way that you can start. At the end of the day, ask yourself just 2 questions. What gave me energy today? And what took it? That's it. 2 simple questions. What gave me energy today and what took it? Over time, the answers are going to start telling you something important. They'll point you towards what's aligned and what isn't. They'll show you where you're living intentionally and where you're just going through the motions so that you can decide, how do I want to respond to the discoveries that I'm making? You've been paying close attention to everyone and everything around you for years. It's time to turn a little of that attention back towards yourself. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to start paying attention. Start with the noticing, because you can't change what you refuse to notice. You don't need to start over and build something new, but you do need to start noticing what's worth continuing to pursue now in the life you have now, and maybe what isn't. In honesty, it matters. So let me leave you with 4 key takeaways from our conversation today. Number 1, your identity, it shifted gradually, not overnight. And know that midlife isn't about losing yourself. It's about recognizing how life and roles and responsibilities have shaped you without your conscious awareness, probably for a long time. And so the first step is noticing and accepting that shift without judgment. Takeaway number 2, going backward is not the goal. Some parts of your younger self are worth reclaiming, but there's probably a lot that just belong to a previous season. This chapter that you're in now, it isn't about reinvention or regression. It's about becoming more honest about who you actually are right now. Takeaway number 3, some of what you call your personality is actually survival. Things like hyper independence, people pleasing, constant productivity, emotional numbing. These were adaptive strategies. They helped you survive. Recognizing them as strategies, but not permanent character traits, it gives you the power to choose. And if you want, you can choose differently. Takeaway number 4, you don't need a life overhaul. You need one intentional shift. So start by auditing your roles, identifying what no longer fits, and choosing one small aligned decision to move forward. Knowing that awareness without action, it changes nothing, but one honest decision at a time, that is what changes everything. Now, this conversation was packed. So I've actually created kind of a cheat sheet of what we talked about today because it is so powerful. And it really is something that is so foundational. If you are standing here in this place in your life wondering, who am I? How did I get here? And what do I even want? Because if you're not asking the question, if you're not the one who's choosing how to shape your life, nobody is choosing. And you want to be able to experience joy and contentment and fulfillment and intentionality in relationships and the things that matter to you. So make sure that you check out the notes here below and grab the cheat sheet. It's really going to help you. Again, internalize and ask the questions and uncover the answers. So make sure you check that out below. Now, I want to close with this. Maybe the goal isn't actually finding your old self again. Maybe the goal is finally noticing the woman standing here right in front of you today. The woman that life shaped, the woman who did survive hard seasons. You'll have to survive more. I wish I could say those were done. But the woman who did survive those hard seasons, the woman who became wiser and more aware and probably more tired, but also more resilient and hopefully more honest. It's not the younger version of you that we're after, and it's not the version that everyone needed from you. We want to discover this version. We want to know who that is. The one who's quietly been evolving through the motherhood and the marriages and the careers and the burnout and the beautiful, ordinary, hard daily moments of a life that has been fully lived. She's not lost. She's not broken. She's not behind or missing anything. She's just that woman has been so busy holding everything else that she hasn't had a moment to actually meet herself. And maybe midlife isn't actually a crisis at all. Maybe it's the first time that many women finally pause long enough to start to make these discoveries. So, if this conversation hit home for you, I'd love for you to share it with a woman in your life who you know needs to hear it because I promise you, she's out there. And if you're ready to stop living on autopilot and start making some intentional shifts, make sure you head to the show notes because I've got that cheat sheet there for you and it's going to help you make sure that you don't miss anything from our conversation today. Know that we have deep, meaningful conversations here about clutter, but did you ever realize how nuanced clutter is? We're talking about midlife clutter today. We have these every single week, typically on a Tuesday. So make sure you come back here next Tuesday and feel free to go back to previous conversations we've had on Tuesday. If you found yourself here in this conversation, know that you'll find yourself in the majority of the conversations that we have here because midlife, it's actually a thing. And I never really realized it till I got here, but I'm excited to have these conversations with you. And so until we talk again, lead yourself well, friend.